At last, I've got a scope. This has been extremely kindly donated to me by Michael O'Rourke in Florida. It's a Rigol DS1102E, all fully working. It had a bit of an ordeal in customs trying to get it here. It took 2 weeks, but of course the universal voltage, so not a problem there at all, but it made it safe and sound. It does have, and it did have before it got here, a slight bit of damage to the external trigger BNC socket. We do have, because he sent me, a replacement socket, and this one at the minute I've already started disassembling. Now what I really want to focus on in this video is how to get the back off it, believe it or not. There are loads of guides on this and the DS1052, which is the same model in the 50 MHz version. Loads of guides on these on the internet of how to get in them. But the way the case is clipped around the mains input is kind of a tamper-proof operation, that they've made it really awkward so that you can't get into them without force. And most of the guides on the internet that I've found basically begin with step 1, remove the case, step 2, and you're going, hold on a minute, there's a really difficult bit here that I'm stuck on. Now, part of the reason I've partly disassembled this before I've started the video is because I'm still without a computer at the moment, so as I'm using the phone in the cradle at the minute to make this video, I can't of course follow the guide. So I've gone over this myself just to get so far. But what I basically need to do, once I've got the case off, is remove this back cover and then remove the power supply board, then remove the bottom circuit board. On the top of the casing, you have the power button. The first thing you have to do is remove this. I used a set of mold grips. They're fairly flat at the edge, they're not too heavily serrated, so I didn't leave any marks on the button. I tried to get this out with a screwdriver and I scratched it, but the mold grip's not a problem. Couldn't do this with my fingers, it was extremely tight, but with the mold grips I could get a good enough grip just to pull it upwards and remove it. If you don't remove the power button, you'll snap the power switch straight off. So first thing, remove the power button with a set of mold grips. This thing, this plastic clip, or bracket as it's sometimes referred to in some of the blogs I've seen, fits over the power socket like this. Then the very edge of the casing fits around this bracket. So when you go to remove the casing, you can't bend the casing this way too much because it just doesn't have enough give to get around these screws, the heads of these screws. The socket stands ever so slightly proud as well, but it's the screws, because this is in the way. You can't physically, without a lot of force, lift this over the screws to get clearance. Now let me go over my method of doing this, and I've got this from a comment in a blog. It worked for me, so I want to cover it in a little clearer detail. On the casing, let me put the casing into shot. The first step, there are 2 screws on the bottom of the case, just simple self-tapping screws. There are 2 screws underneath the handle. Now notice they're still here. You'll need a T15 Torx head screwdriver with quite a long shank on it to be able to get to these. And they don't come out. Well, mine haven't come out of there. Once they're loose from the casing, they stay put. But the ones at the bottom have come out. There are then 2 screws on the main socket which you're advised not to remove. The reason being, these are held on by nuts at the back with shakeproof washers fixed to the nut. So if you loosen these, you won't be able to tighten them up again because the nut is just free spinning. Now there's a trick. I think you've got no choice but to get these out, so there's a trick. Once you've loosened them a bit, and I've put them back on for the sake of showing this, once you've loosened them off a little bit, take a flat bladed screwdriver, normal slotted head screwdriver, preferably quite a wide one, and with the casing on, you should be able to get under it and just pry it up gently while you turn it with the Torx head. And eventually, now I had to do this with the scope between my knees, sat on a bed. It's difficult to do on a desk because you'll risk tipping the scope over. Eventually, it will come free and the nut on the back will drop into the casing. Do the same with the other one. Takes a bit of patience, and the flat blade screwdriver does slip all the time. Takes a bit of patience, but you'll be able to get both of these screws free and the nuts will drop into the casing. When you've done that, you'll be able to remove the back cover. You'll be able to get the case with enough clearance to slide it off, and it should come free. The next step is to remove the two retaining nuts on the D socket. These hold down the back panel. I've already pre-loosened these. But these have to be removed before you can remove the shielding on the back. Just very gently. Set those to one side. And then the shielding simply unclips. It's just press fitted on with these little clips at the side, and we're in. So at this point you can shake the unit around and retrieve these nuts here. Now, what a lot of people have talked about on these is the fan, that it makes a lot of noise. I haven't found the fan to be massively noisy. To be honest, I quite like the fan in a scope making noise so that I know it's on. If I've left it on, I'm well aware of it. But this is a standard 60mm fan with a double 12-volt header. If you wanted to replace this with a good quality silent PC fan or anything like that, I guess you could. That's your prerogative. I'm not really too bothered about it. I considered putting something like an Optua fan in it, but putting a 20 quid fan in my scope just didn't really seem worth it. I'm surprised it's quite a shallow scope because there's just nothing here at all. This is behind the screen, and no, it isn't. It's behind the controls. So I guess this is cleared and shielded to avoid any noise. But they could have got say a 25mm fan in there, which would have had better airflow at a lower RPM, I would expect, but who knows. So next step, we need to remove the top. Now you'll need a T9 screwdriver for all of the screws on this. Now these have washers on, so don't lose the washers. There we go. And we're in. So there's the top clear. Be careful with the power switch that you don't snap this off because it's now standing proud. Okay. So next thing. It looks like we'll have to remove power supply. So we have 1, 2, 3 standard T9 screws, and we have an earth tab there which looks like a T15. Let's see if it is. Yep, T15 fits that, and there as well. So both of those need to be removed. Make sure you connect this back up when you reconnect it. This is vitally important. And we also, if we've reattached the two screws at the side, they'll need to be removed. So let's do those first. Now these in the power socket are quite a long machine screw. Now we can retrieve the two bolts. And there you can see they are. And there's the two nuts you can see with the shakeproof washers welded to them. Now this is the big T15 screw that goes just behind the power socket. And that should now be free, yes. Now this earth screw is difficult to get leverage on without sliding the board slightly out of the way first. Beware, this is a 400 volt capacitor. If it isn't discharged, it's going to bounce straight down your arm, so be careful touching the contacts on the back. I'm just very carefully handling this by the heat sinks. To get some leverage on that, you may need to move the board out of the way slightly to make it loose. Again, don't forget to reattach this. The power supply is loose, so there are two wires attached to a single pin header plug. So if we carefully remove that, power supply is loose. Then this connector, be careful again not to touch that, is for the LCD backlight. We have a pink and white on one side and pink and black wire on the other. So if you line up the two pink wires, you'll be fine. So that just unclips, and that is the power supply loose. It's held in by a little plastic clip there, and there we go, power supply is clear. So now, along the base, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 screws that I can see, and then this should slide out. So each of these screws is also marked with a little screw symbol on the board, because there's a hole here that doesn't have a screw in, but it does have a thread. But I know it doesn't have a screw symbol printed on the board, so I think we'll be all right there. It should be pretty clear when we reassemble it. So let's remove these. Now for this one in the corner, I'm going to need the mould grips because the shank on my screwdriver isn't quite long enough. So I'm going to need some leverage. Okay, now next step, it looks like we have to remove the front panel, which is again T9 torque screws. I think we'll have to take all the knobs off as well. Now, these are self-tapping screws, so don't mix them up with the machine screws for the board. I'm willing to that there's bolts underneath here. Yes, and we're in. So there's a membrane on the front for the main buttons, and at the bottom, just as I suspected, but there's 3 knots on these BNC connectors, so we'll have to remove them all to be able to get to the board. Okay, something I've just spotted, and I'm glad I didn't just rip it out. There's a ground tag soldered to this USB connector. So it looks like I'm going to have to desolder that before I can slide the board backwards. Careful not to solder across the screen when you do that. So that's now clear. We must remember to reattach that. So the board should now be relatively relatively loose. Yes. There we go. We're out. So hopefully now I can tip this up. So there we go. Okay, bit of a jump cut there. We're on day 2. The reason we're on day 2 is I had to go and get this thing, and even that, with the biggest tip that it comes with, was not big enough to fit around the pins, the ground pins. This was an absolute bastard to get out, because the ground plane is so big and these pins are really big, and then the actual die-cast body of this thing is so dense. It was just sinking all the heat away, whether I was using an iron cranked up to 450 or desolder braid or desolder pump. Even the gun I had real trouble with. I was worried at one point that the pins were actually starting to deform and that it would cause some heat damage to the board. I hate working on boards like this generally. What I've done as a precaution, I haven't soldered it in yet, but that's the new socket in place. This capacitor was a 220 at 6.3 volts. Because it's right in the firing line where of course all the heat was, I thought I'd just pull one out, just a nice Panasonic, and just drop in a replacement, because I'm just concerned that I've just fried it, or at least shortened its life, and I don't really fancy opening this thing up again too soon. So as a precaution, I'm going to solder in that brand new Panasonic capacitor there. But the socket's in, no damage to the board. The pins on the back were actually fairly easy to get out, but the locking pins at the front there, the chassis pins on the plug, the plug actually came out, the whole assembly, but the pins were still in the board, because the pins are sort of press fitted into the jack body. Here we go, I've got the old one there, so you can see it's just left 2 holes. The socket worked loose. The gun was great for doing the pins on the back, the actual contact pins, but even there, because the one on the right there is again part of that ground plane, was really tricky to do without just ripping it out of the board. The trace on the other side for the signal pin is so unbelievably tiny. I doubt that would even pick it up, but when I looked at where it goes into a little surface mount resistor, it's the thinnest trace of gold you could believe. Well, I guess gold plated copper. So I've been so careful with this, and hopefully if we get that resoldered, and hopefully it still works, because it's made me a little nervous doing this. I've had to, obviously as well, I've had to completely remove the board. It was just much easier to work on, so I did undo both ribbon connectors. Now look at the state of the bench. But let's see if we can get this resoldered. Okay, it's done. The solder joints look a bit crap. I'm a bit of a crap solderer, to be honest, and I probably really need a really high wattage gun to be able to do a better job of these. That massive ground plane just sinks away so much heat. The solder just clumps up, even with flux. I think I need some better flux as well. But it's on. Let's see if it works. Part of the reason I have a bench set up in my kitchen is because between around about 2 and 3 o'clock at the moment, in January at least, if it's a clear day, the sunlight is perfect. It's such a bright room, so it's really beneficial for working on stuff like this, to have good light. I've tried to do repairs in the studio sometimes, and the sunlight's pretty blocked out anyway in the back room, and it's just such, wow, this is tricky to do. It just makes such a difference. There we go. So that's the ground strap rejoined on the USB socket. So now I can tighten these up properly. I'm just going around finger tightening them at the moment. Then screw the board back down. The ribbon cables have been reconnected. One thing to consider, there's a 5-volt regulator here that I noticed on mine was sort of pushed over slightly and touching these capacitors, which are only 85° rated. There's no heatsink on this. Better reconnect that fan as well when I put that screw in. In fact, I'm going to do it now. There's no heatsink on that 5-volt regulator. I don't know what it's dropping, but it's a bit, yeah. If I had a heatsink, a small enough heatsink, because it's pretty, oh, this is tricky. It's pretty cramped in there. It's tricky because I'm trying to do it backwards. That would be why. There we go. Yeah, it's pretty cramped in that slot. But I think I could get a little heatsink without blocking these cables off too much to pop on there. I think I should be able to get to that with the power board even up here at some stage. So if I ever find a small enough heatsink for that package, I'll put one on. I think all the capacitors in this are marked Epcot. I don't know what the brand is, I don't know what the quality is like. I can see myself in a few years changing these for something like Panasonic FMs, which have never let me down. So guess who completely forgot that not too long ago we picked up a socket set. Let's see if we've got one that fits. It's if we'll get enough height clearance on that. That's always the tricky bit with socket sets on connectors and potentiometers. But let's see. No, they don't fit. BFI it is. I don't think these are likely to hurt anything, to be honest. I've probably picked these up really cheap, and judging by the state of the jaws already, I think they're basically made of cheddar. There comes a time when you just have to stop buying supermarket tools. No matter what offer they're on, they're made of cheese every time. All good. So now we go back to the self-tapping screws. Okay, so front panel on, ribbons attached, fan attached, USB ground strap fitted. Now I think we need to get the power board back in. So we have to reconnect the backlight. So we match up the pink wires. Yep. There we go. Now I'm led to believe, and I'll soon find out, that putting the cover back on with the screws already in is a hell of a lot easier than trying to get it off. We'll soon find that out. Before the top panel actually, reconnect the power supply to the main board. There we go. So that's back. Okay. Power socket's done and the power connector is reconnected on the main board. So the next thing is the top panel. That goes that way around because we can see we've got this cut off edge that matches the bottom of the board. So just remember to clean the screen. So Before I put the back case on, I'm just going to make sure I haven't got any little bits of solder or just any flotsam and jetsam kicking around before I seal it all up. I think at this stage I'm going to try a power up test. Okay, I hope we can see in this daylight, but here's the moment of truth. Looks good. Excellent. Fan running? The fan's running. It seems quieter for some reason. But I know the fan does pick up speed as it runs, so this notorious fan. It doesn't really bother me too much. I mean, there's another fan in this. Now compared to that, that's a breeze. No pun intended. Let's get this back cover on then. So the feet, put the flat side down, and they should just click into place. And then I'm going to attempt to get this bracket on and hold it in place. Now I've just had to have a couple of attempts at this and I've realised why. The bracket that fits it actually has a slight angle like this because the casing's got an angle. So you have to make sure it's the right way round, otherwise the casing will stand proud and it won't snap together at each side. So now we can get the screws back in. You have to lift up the handle ever so slightly to get the clearance for the screws behind it to go down. And they're machine screws, so they do take quite a bit of turning. There's quite a fine thread on them. There we go. And power button. There we go. Okay, it's a couple of days on, back on the Rigol scope. I've had a few days off this for various reasons. It's all back together, and I've had a few days to mull over a bit of an issue with this. For a few days I thought I had caused some damage to it from excess heat, what with trying to get that external trigger jack off, with the massive ground plane and everything that was sinking all the heat away from the soldering iron. But now I'm not so sure it is something that I have caused. I did notice when I first tested it, when I first got it, that XY mode always pushed the trace right down to the bottom right corner. It never would centre on the screen. Didn't seem to work very well. And also, if channel 2 was set to DC coupling, it would shoot off the screen. It would keep bouncing off the screen. And both set to AC coupling at the moment from the internal square wave generator for the test point. You can see that channel 2 not only has got this, the blue one, not only got this massive DC offset on there, despite them both being coupled AC, but it's also a terrible shape. It's got these huge peaks on it, as if there's some capacitive coupling going on there. Now, after looking up DC offset issues with this range of scopes, I did find a YouTube video. Someone had commented that underneath the shielding on the front end amp, where I may have mentioned earlier in the video I might want to look at, there's some relays that are prone to getting stuck, and this causes a DC offset problem. And I've adjusted the probe compensation on both probes, swapped them around, done all sorts like that to try and get this down. There was a bit of a rise on the first channel early on, but now it's warmed up. It's been on for about half an hour. It seems okay, but we've got this. Yeah, that looks pretty good. But we've got this huge peak still on channel 2. Now both are centered there vertically. If I click the button, it will center them both vertically. See, it pops up position 0. And if I change the coupling to ground, they should both share the, yeah, they both sit in the same ground plane, so there's no issue there. But if I set it to DC offset, see, it's all the way up there, so we've got a, what's that, 1 volt per division, so we've got something like a 3 volt, 3 and a bit volt difference there, a DC offset going on. So I think at some point, it won't be now, channel 1's working fine, so I'm going to use channel 1 for a few repairs I need to do. But channel 2 I will have to come back to at some point. I think we'll have to pull it apart again, have a look under that shielding for the front end amp, have a look at these relays. Comment was that they get sticky, and someone had done at least a temporary fix on the relays in his machine by tapping them with a screwdriver. I'm going to have a look. I'm going to try and do a bit more research on this and see if they can maybe be replaced. The relays and the driver transistors that click the relays on and off, I've read are worth checking, so I think the next stage on this I will have a look at that. Let's just put that back down to AC so they both match. But yeah, channel 1 is working okay, so let's click that off. So I have no issues with channel 1 really at all. It's responsive, it's not bouncing off screen. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the scope. I've done a firmware update on this. I waited a few days for a small USB stick to come because they have to be formatted FAT32. Most of my USB sticks are full of other things, so I just wanted a small 2 GB stick that I could keep with this for getting screenshots and for doing firmware updates. You can get the firmware off the Rigol website. You just have to put the serial number and your details in, and they'll send you a direct link to the firmware. So it is, if I go to utility, go to system info, 0402 service pack 1 is running, so seems to be okay there. But yeah, this issue with channel 2. Now, I should show the external trigger. We disconnect the second channel. The external trigger does work. If I switch that down to ×1, you have to do that for the trigger, and I go to trigger menu, source, external, it still locks. If I just compare that to an open channel, see, it's unlocked, so not a problem. The only weird thing I've spotted with external trigger is if you set the trigger to internal, what am I doing? Still not exactly used to this yet, especially the parallax difference you get between the buttons and the screen. If I set that to internal and then move the trigger, you get the trigger level indicator shows up on screen there. If you go to external trigger, you can adjust the level, but it doesn't show you any kind of indication in relation to your wave on screen, which is a little bit weird. You do get an indicator that shows you the voltage, but no physical division in your wave, which is a bit weird. But I expect most of the time I will most likely be using it on internal anyway, so external may be useful for a couple of digital signals or maybe some video stuff. I've had a look at a couple of basic video waves on this. The zoom function is really useful. If you click the horizontal button, you get a zoom function, which means you can view 2 versions of the, I think actually both channels, but it's handy for single channel, on screen at the same time, which is a really cool feature, so you can look at rise times and all kinds of stuff like that. I really like that. You can click that on and off by just clicking the big horizontal button there. So I'm going to leave that there for now. I'm going to have a look at this in the future in a further video. I hope it was of some help for someone trying to get in one, do a couple of basic repairs on one, and hopefully I'll have some time at some point to look further at it. So I'll say goodbye for now. Thanks for watching.